So he established very on that I could answer yes and no. We created a system of blinks. One blink for yes, two for no, three for I love you, and four for you're a moron. Um,
That's
but
great.
but it was great he had established that I could communicate and that I was there. But many people didn't understand that if they asked me open questions, how do you respond with blinks? It's like, what is wrong? Are you, um, what's wrong with you? And how do you answer what is wrong when all you can do is blink yes, no, and tell them you're a moron?
This is the Recovery After Stroke podcast with Bill Gassiamis, helping you navigate recovery after stroke.
Bill from recoveryafterstroke.com. This is episode 38, and my guest today is Clodah Dunlop. Clodah was a police officer in Northern Ireland in training to improve her time of running the mile from 7 minutes to 6 minutes. And she experienced a stroke which was caused by a vertebral artery dissection, which was created by whiplash, which occurred during a minor collision in a vehicle while at work. After a number of mini strokes, Clodah experienced a massive stroke, which left her locked in. Now, before we get started, if you have ever wondered what else I can do to help you with your stroke recovery, you should know that I have set up a few recovery after stroke support packages where stroke survivors can come into a community while trying to get better on their own and get help from other people who are already further along in the recovery timeline. I too am a 3-time stroke survivor and brain surgery survivor, and I have built for you what I was missing when I was sent home from hospital in the hope that you don't have to do stroke recovery as tough as I did. Support packages give you access to a variety of tools 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that you can also work on other areas of your stroke recovery that you don't get the chance to work on during physical therapy or rehabilitation. With tailored support available for less than $8.50 per week, all recovery after stroke support packages bring you stroke recovery to the comfort of your own home. To try out recovery after stroke support and see if it is right for you, you will get the first 7 days free, as well as a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. As a bonus, you will also get 2 face-to-face Zoom support calls with myself to take your recovery to the next level. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com/support to sign up. It won't cost you anything for the first 7 days, and you will get a full refund if you are not happy after 30 days. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Now it's on with the show. Well, as I said, it's really I really appreciate the opportunity to chat to you. I've had a little bit of a look to see some of your stuff on, on the internet, on Facebook, etc.
Yeah.
And it's a really inspiring story. And of course, my story is similar, but not as dramatic. Can you tell me a little bit about what you were doing before you had the stroke?
Um, Back in April 2015, almost 3 years ago to the day, I was a fit, active frontline police officer serving in Northern Ireland in a particularly difficult area. I was a frontline police officer. I loved life and I loved fitness. Back in April 2015, my biggest challenge then was, could I get a 7-minute mile down to a 6-minute mile? And if I could, I would join an elite department in the police service in Northern Ireland. Fitness was my everything.
Wow. So you wanted to go for the 6-minute mile?
Yeah, that I had got it down to a 7-minute mile, and if I'd reached a 6-minute mile, I could apply for an elite department within the police service in Northern Ireland. It was a bit like I fancied myself as a bit of a GI Jane.
So how long were you working in the police service?
At that time, I was working in the police service 8 years.
8 years. So you were fairly
Yeah,
established. You knew your job well. You were pretty on top of things, and everything was going normal. What was your personal life like?
Life was pretty much perfect at that time. I had been through a divorce, but I met my partner, Adrian, and we were together 2 years before I took my stroke. We had bought a new house together. We had travelled around Southern Africa together. Just prior to me taking my stroke, we'd gone to South Africa, travelled up to Namibia, across to Botswana, Zambia, and then Zimbabwe, back down to South Africa and home. And we had camped all around that. Life had felt perfect. It almost felt life is almost too perfect back in 2015.
Yeah. I can relate a little bit to what you're saying about that. You look back, I do at least, and everything was kind of going pretty well, although I was a bit of a whinge. I was complaining about certain things, but normal stuff, life stuff. And sometimes I look back at those times and think, wow, what would I give for everything to be the way that it was back then, before anything went what I call wrong. But I know what you're saying. And did you have anything that you thought was something that could lead to you being unwell? Were you noticing anything in your body that was giving you a sign or a warning that you had potentially something life-threatening about to happen?
Absolutely not. No, I was really fit, really healthy. So when I woke in an intensive care ward, I'd wondered what had happened. And when someone told me I'd had a stroke, I couldn't understand why. I had no one, and as a result of the minor collision, I had suffered whiplash in my neck. And my stroke came from a weakness in the artery in the left side of my neck. Clot travelled up towards my brain before it became lodged in the brainstem, and parts of my brain began to die until I was lucky enough to have surgery to have the clot removed.
You were involved in a collision? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I was involved in a minor collision at work, and as a result of the minor collision, I sustained whiplash in my neck. And for approximately 6 months, I'd had a small pain in my neck, and went to physiotherapy, had taken painkillers, but the pain was so minor, it didn't cause me any alarm or distress. I was just constantly aware that it was there. But we can now say that it was the artery of my neck weakening which was causing the pain.
So the minor pain that you experienced was from the whiplash, would you say? Or was it something else that was occurring that you are now aware of that you weren't aware of at the time?
The minor pain was from the whiplash, but the whiplash had caused the vertebral artery in my neck to start to weaken. So the pain was actually coming from it, but I had thought it was just minor whiplash, and so it didn't cause me any alarm, just minor discomfort.
Yeah. So then the clot travelled up into the brainstem, got lodged there, and that's where the stroke occurred.
Yep. For several days prior to taking the stroke, spurs of the clot released into my brain, and it caused me to feel like I was going to collapse. But it wasn't until the major clot released that I took the massive stroke. I'd always thought that when the spurs released, I had confused that with I was just feeling tired.
Yeah, so you just confused as feeling tired. Did you notice any numbness or any tingling or any different sensations in your body at all, or?
No, I had, when the spurs released, I collapsed. But then I came around within 4 or 5 minutes, returned to normal. So I've now since learned that they were mini strokes, but and very often in younger people, mini strokes, or even older people, the symptoms can disappear.
Yeah.
I think I was unfortunate enough that had happened, so I had dismissed what was going on in my body as tiredness.
Yeah, often the mini strokes are the sign that there's a bigger stroke
Yeah.
around the corner, and symptoms go away, and people have never had experiences with stroke, so they just ignore it and don't really pay attention to it. I ignored the symptoms of what was causing numbness in my left side for 7 days. How long?
Yeah.
How long did you go before the initial mini stroke and then the bigger stroke?
Well, I had an initial mini stroke at work on a Thursday night. And because I collapsed at work and they were a little bit alarmed, it was on a night shift. So as a police officer, had been put into an ambulance, taken across to hospital with blue lights and sirens still in my uniform. But we all dismissed that as just tiredness because it was a night shift. But then on the Monday, following Thursday, I took a massive stroke. But
Wow.
in between, I had only really tiredness. I had no other physical symptoms of stroke.
And were you at home, or where were you when you experienced the larger stroke?
When, well, I probably had a mini stroke before I took the larger stroke at home. On Easter Monday 2015, my sister visited my house, and as I got up to open the back door of the house to let her in, and a mini stroke came on me and I collapsed in front of her, which alarmed her. It was unusual for me to collapse. She called an ambulance, but by the time the ambulance arrived, I was completely back to normal. But I went to the A&E department, and as they waited in A&E, my condition started to deteriorate. But again, when I was saw by medical staff, they thought that it may be fatigue. And just as they were discharging me, I took a massive stroke. And they didn't know what it was. It was confused with, had I taken prescription drugs because of my job? Was I stressed? And so for quite a few hours, I was put in just coma. But it wasn't several hours later that they realised I had taken a massive brainstem stroke.
Yeah, wow. It's quite dramatic. I mean, I imagine that your sister would have some long-lasting trauma because of what she experienced when you took ill.
She said it was the worst day of her life. We feel that when I was in A&E, when I took the final stroke, that I died, and there was a brief few moments then when my heart did stop. She hit my face and screamed my name, and I feel I had the whole white light experience, that
Wow.
I was happy and peaceful today. But she hit my face, screamed my name. Doctors worked on me, and they brought me back to what I can only describe as an absolute nightmare. And I never thought that I would say it's peaceful to die, or I was happy to. But at that time, at that moment, I was more than happy to die.
Yeah, I've had a friend of mine who experienced altitude sickness one time when he was overseas in
Yeah.
Annapurna near Kathmandu.
Wow.
And he said that as he was going through the lack of oxygen to the body and to the brain, and the
Yeah.
people that he was around, he was happy in telling them, look, it's a good day to die. It's okay, no problem, I'll be fine. You guys just look after yourselves. And it was really
Yeah.
traumatizing to the people that were with him. But at the time, he felt
Yeah.
really comfortable, and he said he felt just almost euphoric.
I always felt there was a real irony in the moment too, because in Northern Ireland, the police service there still is a terrorist threat. So that every day before I went to work, I would check under my car to check there wasn't a bomb. And I said, it was, I wanted to live. I didn't want to die. Um, but then I took a stroke, and the bomb, ironically, was in my own head.
Yeah, wow. We often also we forget about the impact that our illness has on our loved ones. Of course, at the time, we're really unaware. At least I was unaware of exactly how serious my condition was, but I had a feeling that my family were really concerned about the extent of what it was that was happening, especially to my brain. I couldn't really focus on myself too much because I wasn't in the space, to be able to comprehend almost what had happened, but they could really comprehend what the doctors were telling them and what could happen.
Yeah.
And we take it for granted that the family goes through a really tough time.
I think I woke with locked in syndrome, and it was very different because um, I couldn't move a muscle from the top of my face to the tip of my toes and my feet, all but one. I was able to move my eyes, so I could see and hear everything, and I could see my parents, my sister, and my partner anxious and distressed at the end of my bed. I could hear medical staff tell them that I would never be the same person again. It was most likely that I would be vegetative. And I could see them crying, but I couldn't reassure them. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. And for days in intensive care, I was able to observe everything that was going on around me, but I
Wow.
couldn't communicate.
Wow. So in that time, were you aware at least of what had happened to you? Had they spoken about what had happened to you in front of your family while you were present?
A nurse had told me when I had woken in intensive care, I was in a just coma for one day. So on the second day when I woke, the nurse informed me that I'd had a massive stroke and that I was in intensive care. And I wasn't diagnosed with locked-in syndrome for a couple of for I think it was a few more days. Um, so people were talking around my bed, but there wasn't much detail about my condition, and I found that made me very anxious because I knew I'd had a stroke. I couldn't understand that I was young, fit, and healthy. I wanted to ask a lot of questions to why has this happened, and then I was puzzled and frightened too that I'd had a stroke, but all I knew of stroke was that it affected one side and not the other. And here I was lying, and both sides were affected, but I couldn't move even, like, I couldn't move my tongue or my mouth. And I was confused as to what type of stroke is this. So it was a very terrifying time lying there, unable to move and being unable to communicate, to ask questions about my condition.
Yeah. Did you have moments where you were sleeping and moments where you were awake, or were you just constantly in this sort of awakened state without being able to move? Like, what was that like? Were you going through a cycle of sleepy and tiredness and awake and alert? How was that going?
I was largely awake my whole time in intensive care. Um, when I woke and I realized I couldn't move and I couldn't communicate, I was more helpless than a newborn baby. In my head, I was still Clodah. I was still the girl that was preoccupied with life's routine, worried about my running times. Could I get my mile time reduced? But externally, I couldn't kick out when I was in pain, cry out when I needed help.
Okay, so you
Um,
so you still
so
experienced pain and
yeah,
you experienced all the challenges that most people experience after stroke, except you had no ability to communicate that whatsoever.
I couldn't move at all. Effectively, I was being held a prisoner by my own body.
Well, I can't imagine what that's like, and I know that a lot of people have experienced some dramatic symptoms as a result of stroke, and I
Yeah.
understand about locked-in syndrome. Does it feel like it's a dream, or does it feel real? How did it feel for you? Were you in any sort of state of awareness of this is actually you, your body's actually not moving, you're conscious, or did it feel like a bit of a dream, a haze, a nightmare?
Um, it felt very real, but it was a living nightmare. From I woke, and I always say to people, effectively, I was a quadriplegic, but I had the same intellect that I had the day before. Um, and it was terrifying. Um, I can only describe it I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie. I loved skydiving. In Northern Ireland, I'd been in many public order situations. I got recruited for the public order team, and I took petrol bombs and missiles. But there was nothing more terrifying than being held a prisoner by my own body, unable to communicate.
Wow, I smile, but it's a nervous smile because I hear you say stuff like, I took petrol bombs,
Yeah,
and that's something that's really foreign to me or anyone who hasn't taken a petrol
yeah.
bomb, and yet locked-in syndrome was worse.
Yeah, lockdown syndrome is more terrifying. Just to be unable to communicate, to indicate to anyone around you your simple needs, your simple wants or desires. At nights I was much too hot, but I couldn't indicate to anyone around me that I was hot. I wanted a fan or a cold compress, and it became alarming too. I had male nurses give me my nightly bed baths, and as a female, I felt so vulnerable. At work, I dealt with victims of sexual assaults, and I became very acutely aware that there were male nurses bathing my naked body, and I got a notion in my head, or I got frightened that if someone touched me or sexually assaulted me, I couldn't cry out, I couldn't scream for help, but also I couldn't tell anybody what had happened. And I became so aware of how vulnerable I was.
Yeah, well, that just imagining what that would have been like is very difficult for me. I had the pleasure of needing to just convince my nurses to stay out of the toilet when I needed to go to the toilet after surgery.
Mm.
Let it, and that was really devastating and challenging. And they wanted to shower me and bathe me,
Yeah,
and I just couldn't move my left side. So I had the ability to use my right side. It was just my left side, and that felt really disconcerting, and that felt really uncomfortable. And I'm just in my mind, I'm playing over what it would have been like to multiply that by 2 times and be in your situation. And it's yeah, it's something that we wouldn't want to wish on anybody, really, is it?
no, it is terrifying. I became frightened too. I was very aware of um, how helpless my body was. I was like a rag doll, and the medical staff would have to turn you, and it became terrifying. Even the turns, I was frightened that I would fall off the bed to the floor, which is bizarre. I'd jump from airplanes, and that hadn't frightened me, but a simple fall from the bed, I realised I could really hurt myself
Yeah.
here, and it terrified me.
I fell out of bed the first day after surgery, so I had a very big scar on my head. The stitches and all the stuff that was going on, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't feel my left side. The nurse tried to help me go to the toilet, and
Yeah,
came to my she came to one of my sides, and she put her arm around me, but she was half my size. She was very short and petite, and she couldn't hold my weight, and I was a dead weight. And as soon as I got out of the bed, I fell to the ground, and that was actually terrifying. I screamed, and I just feared my head getting hurt and damaged, and my brain getting damaged, and it was damaged enough, and I didn't want it to be even more damaged.
yeah,
So I can relate to your concern, getting dropped and not being able to support yourself,
yeah,
and not to have made the decision to jump out of a plane. It's just you're on a bed and somebody else drops you. That's a little bit different.
yeah. It's terrifying. Yeah.
How did you slowly come out of locked-in syndrome and regain your body?
Um, I always say I thought about my life at work. I had 24 hours in a day, and when you're awake and you can't move, that's quite a long period of time to fill. So I'd have thought about my life at work and how police officers ran to trouble, not away from it. At work, we learned about the fight or flight response when faced with a threat to your survival. And I knew that simply I had two choices. And definitely flight wasn't in me, so I chose to fight. Um, But it took a long time before. How do you show people that you're willing to fight if all you can do is communicate by blinking your eyelids? So it was 2.5 weeks into locked-in syndrome that I was issued by an electronic eye gaze spell board by my speech and language therapist. And I would spell out the Article 3 caution that we issue when we arrest people to the nurses. And I would spell articles out of the European human rights to show that I had the same intellect. But then I soon recognised that you can be as determined as you want, you can spell out what you want, but physically I needed to show everybody how determined I was. And I really got that opportunity after 3 weeks when I got neurophysio. I would be wheeled on my bed to neurophysio ward and would be hoisted from my bed onto a plinth. And I would be put into a seated position with 5 physiotherapists supporting every bit of my body, including my head. And there we would put me into a stand, hoping that my brain would re-engage with my body and my muscles. But it was during this stand that I could show how determined I was. I would stand the aim was that I would stand for 30 seconds. My partner would be there. He was asked to ask me, was I okay? So when he asked me, was I okay, I would always blink yes. But then my body would be consumed by a faint and I would pass out. And again, we would try to stand. And again, he would ask me, was I okay? And I would blink yes. And I became known for the patient who was determined to the last, who would stand until they faint. And this became my daily routine, standing, being linked to a stats machine until I would pass out, or until nearly I would pass out, and then we would sit me down again, and we would begin again the process of making me stand. And it was the one point I could show that I had a lifeless body, but I was still the same girl as I was before stroke. Still the same girl that wanted to get a 7-minute mile down to a 6-minute mile.
Yeah. Hey, is it frustrating when before you got your board where you could blink words out, etc., or something? Was it blinking words out or pointing to words?
I had an electronic eye gaze spell board. Basically, it was a board with an insert cut out in the middle, and around the board were 6 coloured squares, and contained within those squares were coloured letters. I would look at the letter that I wanted to blink at. I would blink at it. The letter would perhaps be coloured blue in the green square. So I would look then to a green square. So for every letter I wanted, I had to blink twice. It was like predictive text.
Yep.
And the user at the other side would only see the coloured squares that I was looking at, and on their side would hit the colour that they saw me looking at or indicate.
So it was a combination of 2 people, yourself and the other person supporting the rest of the process.
Yeah, it was tedious and difficult often for the other person, but as the patient using it, it was also frustrating. Conversations were never fast like this.
Yeah.
I had to spell everything out, and very often you assume that everyone has good language skills, but I soon discovered that many of the nurses couldn't understand flamboyant language, and I learned that communication has to be short and direct.
Yeah.
And flamboyant language doesn't work.
Yeah. How before you received that board, was it frustrating when they weren't asking you the right questions, for example? Well, they would tell you to blink and do certain things, but they don't know what to ask, do they?
It was really difficult for the first 2.5 weeks when all I could do was blinking, because my partner discovered, which is very unusual for locked-in syndrome, on the first day that I was there, he asked me, Clodah, are you still there? And I knew I can't miss this chance. And he said, blink once if you're there. So I'd closed my eyes and counted to three and made sure I can't flutter my eyelids. I need to get this right. And so I blinked yes at him.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
So he established very on that I could answer yes and no. We created a system of blinks. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no, 3 for I love you, and 4 for you're a moron.
That's great.
But it was great. He had established that I could communicate and that I was there. But many people didn't understand that if they asked me open questions, how do you respond with blinks? It's like, what is wrong? Are you, what's wrong with you? And how do you answer what is wrong when all you can do is blink yes, no, and tell them you're a moron, which was quite useful because in my own head then when they'd say, what is wrong? I would blink at them 4 times.
That is absolutely hilarious. I love it. Absolutely love it. I imagine that made it just a little bit easier in your situation to be able to tell someone they're a moron.
Do you know, it really did. And it amused me too. Some of the nurses were good and they knew to ask closed questions like, are you in pain? Are you comfortable? And when they would enter the ward and see me blink 4 times, they understood that I was saying, you're a moron. And it amused them too. It allowed me to become more human to them. And I think for people to understand the person you are, you have to be able to communicate in some way, even if it's not through a spoken word.
Yeah, and a sense of humor during such a dramatic time in someone's life is really important. No matter how bad things are, a sense of humor is really important.
Do you know, I found humor was really important to reassure my family and friends that I was still Clodah and that I was still there. I remember my best friend came to visit me within 3 weeks after I had had my initial stroke, and she brought her husband, and I could see that he was terrified. He was pale and nervous, and I knew that he didn't recognize this Clodah lying with a tracheostomy and an NG tube and completely lifeless. And my partner gave him the spell board, told him how to use it, and I could see his terror. So I thought, I'm going to make him realize it's still Clodah, we can still have fun. And I spelled out to him, it was called Chris. Hi Chris, I've shit myself. And he read the spell board and he was like, I think I've put this down wrong. And I spelled out, Chris, you're a moron. I have shit myself. And my partner, he looked at him and he was like, yeah, she has shit herself. And everybody laughed. And my best friend, she was like, Chris, you're great. You create diarrhea in people. But it made the situation calm, and relaxed him. He realized she's still in there. She's still cheeky. She's still got her humor, and it made him more comfortable.
Yeah. Wow. That is amazing. I love your approach. It's just really what some situation needs, because it's very dramatic to have a conversation with somebody and to tell them that you've defecated in your pants in any other way. Like, how do you have that conversation with somebody? But the fact that you're able to take him off guard and to tell him he's a moron at the end and to do all the things that you did, like, makes even that situation, which is quite severe and serious, it just makes it better and easier. And I felt that I was also trying to calm and allay the concerns of everybody else around me. I was quite calm myself
Yeah.
in what I had to overcome. Like you, I was very determined. I knew that I was going to get better. I was looking for solutions. I didn't want to know about the problems. But I had to do a lot of work to keep everyone else around me calm so that when they turned up, I
Yeah.
wasn't dealing with their stress and their anxieties. That's something that you relate to.
Yeah. Um, it is because I realized very early on that although that in my head I still felt like I was Clodah and that I would get better, I could see the anxiousness on the faces of people, of my family and friends who visited. So for I was in hospital for 7.5 months. So during that time, I put a very restricted visiting on. It was just my mother, father, my sister, my close friends, my partner. I realized how distressed people became when they visited me and they couldn't communicate with me, and I had to keep them away to protect myself almost because I knew my condition and I almost not accepted it, but I felt like I'm going to get better. But I don't need to deal with their emotional distress. I have enough to cope with myself
Yeah,
and to keep myself strong.
yeah. And I love it. It's a situation of, if people don't know how to behave, I think what the best thing they can do is do nothing. Just come in, offer their love, give a hug, give a kiss, and get out. Just so that you can
Yeah,
say that you attended and you offered your support and leave it at that. Because I used to have, well, I come from a Greek family, and the Greek families are very dramatic. So when something goes wrong, even when a child just cut their head open a little bit,
yeah,
25 people have to become aware of it, and you have to make all this fuss and all this scene. So imagine when something is a lot more serious, they all at the same time, when they all turn up to the hospital room.
I preferred when I entered rehabilitation after 6 weeks. I really restricted my visiting, especially with my family. Um, I felt like rehabilitation was my day job, so I didn't allow afternoon visitors. That was for my rehabilitation.
Mm,
So I only permitted visitors during the evening period. But again, that was almost to deliver me something. It would be my mother to deliver me clean clothes. My sister, I always got my sister to help with personal care matters. As a female, when you've no use of your arms, simple things like I'm worried about my eyebrows still do concern you. So my sister would come and pluck my eyebrows and fix my hair and shave my legs. But yeah, and my partner, and we had really became very determined that from very early on that we wouldn't wait for life to begin when I recovered. We would live life to the full when I recovered. So it was very strange for doctors and nurses when I was in rehabilitation. My sister would arrive one evening and fix my hair and pluck my eyebrows. My mother would bring me a dress. And the next evening, I would get my partner to come and we would go out in Belfast to a restaurant or a bar. And he would often cut up my food and spoon feed me. And I'm sure people in the restaurant were very confused by a girl with her hair and her makeup done in a dress and her partner spoon feeding her. It was, I'm sure, very surreal for people.
they would have thought he was the perfect gentleman.
I know that we took a spa break about a year after my illness, and at that point I could stand myself, but I would have needed a lot of physical support to do it. My partner and I went into a swimming pool, and if he had let go, I would have drowned, I would have sank. So he gave me there was a lot of physical support. But later on that evening, a couple approached us in the bar in the hotel, and they said, um, "We thought you were really being really sickeningly romantic in the pool, and it wasn't until you got out that we saw your partner carry you out and put you into a wheelchair, and we felt so terrible." But they were so impressed by how gentle and how caring he was.
Yeah, it's
Um,
easy for people to judge when
yeah,
they don't understand what other people are doing, and it makes sense. I was the same. I probably did the same, especially when people would walk slowly in front of me. Before I became a slow walker, I walk well
yeah,
now, but at the beginning I was a slow walker, and I used to almost push people over to get past them in a queue, or going
yeah.
into a store or something like that. And then
It's like,
I quickly realized, that okay, there's probably a lot more going on for people that we are completely unaware of, that makes them walk slowly and be a burden to somebody like me who was completely physically fit and totally unaware of physical disability.
yeah. I think that's one thing I've learned from this journey is that I'm a lot more patient now as a person, and I realize that everybody's on a journey in life. Everybody is doing the best they can,
Mm,
and everybody has challenges. And everybody's challenge, I would say, is as important and as big to them as the next person challenge. And I would often say, my mother would worry that she is making a mountain out of a molehill now if she cuts her finger.
mm,
But I say, that's challenging in the moment.
mm.
When my partner drinks all the milk and there's no milk for breakfast, I find that challenging. There's like challenges are all relative to the moment.
Yeah, yeah. I understand. Your training as a police officer would have made you resilient in your job. You would have had to have a level of resilience to put up with the things that you put up with on a daily basis. How do you feel that the work that you did and the resilience that you had to have for your work helped you get through your experience with stroke?
I think at work, we are very big into personal responsibility and being resilient. And I knew that I'm personally responsible for me. There is no one else who can make me better. And I need to remain resilient. I can't let this get me down. So every day I would work with all the different therapists, speech and language therapists, physios, and occupational therapists, and again, medical staff. And I would say that some of them I perhaps wouldn't have chosen to be friends with before stroke, but I realized that we were all in the same team. We were all trying to make me better, but I personally needed to want me to get better. So I had to work with them every day. Um,
Yeah,
and I would say it's personal responsibility is a huge thing. Um,
yeah. It's
you
your
can't
responsibility.
expect, yeah,
Yeah,
there
I'm
was
the
no one
same.
else. Yeah,
Yeah, and I often talk about that, and I tell people as well that we have the ability to respond, and that's what our response ability is. It's our ability to respond, and regardless of how challenged we are by the impact that the particular stroke we've experienced has created or caused, there
yeah,
is no one wants you to recover more than you, hopefully. And if you don't want it, people are going to go, well, I'm just going to
yeah,
go and help the next person who wants it more.
yeah. No, I agree with you. It is, you have to want it. I was told, you'll never walk, you'll never talk. But in my head, I had thought, if I get something just to move, I will work at it. The psychologist in the hospital thought that I was much too positive as a person, but I had said that um, I don't fear failure. I will work at this, and I'm not setting a time limit on success. And I will be the best that I can be. And I still feel that I will be the best I can be, whatever that is. And I do accept that parts of my brain are dead, and I will have long term disabilities. but I still will fight every day to be the best I can be.
Yeah. What have you got to say to doctors who say things like you'll never walk and never talk again? Have you had an opportunity to tell them what you think of their comments?
Yes, I have. It was, I would always tell them now, don't give people no hope. You don't have to give them false hope. You don't have to say, yes, you will return to normal, you will talk and you'll run again. But I think don't eradicate the hope. I had some wonderful physiotherapists who were quite the opposite. They would never tell me, you won't walk and you won't talk. And I would spell out to them, I will run again. And they would tell me to focus on each day as it came. They were like, you're like a baby. First, you need to learn to sit, then stand, then take steps, and we'll see. And I think their approach was very correct. They never took away my hope, but it was set small goals every day and just learn to take things step by step until you achieve your big goal.
Your psychologist said that you're far too positive for somebody in your
Yeah,
situation. That
yeah.
psychologist shouldn't be a psychologist. Surely they should be something else.
It was in my first family meeting in rehab. There was real concerns about Um, before I had my first family meeting in rehabilitation, I was spoken to by my caseworker, and he had said, "What are your goals, Clodah, for um, just for the first family meeting?" And I had spelled out to him to leave hospital walking and talking, not perfectly, but just enough to work on. And he looked at me with real pity, and he said, has no one explained locked in syndrome to you? And he it started to explain my condition, and I let him finish because obviously I couldn't interrupt him. I couldn't move or couldn't talk. But then I spelled out to him, I will leave here walking and talking, not perfectly. And again, he looked at me and he said, but you have locked in syndrome. And I spelled out to him, um, you're full of bullshit. You've obviously never had to work really hard at something in your life, and I will show you. And I think, yes, I understood my condition, but I'd always felt that should I never talk, that I would always continue to work at it.
Mm.
And I was always big into Um, I'd always spelled out, I will return to work even if I never move or am able to talk again, because as long as I can communicate and have the same intellect, I can still live a full life.
Yeah.
Um, yes, I would be confined to a wheelchair, but just because you've disabilities doesn't mean that you're going to have a lesser life. And I think there was a perception that because I was going to be paralyzed, that I would have a lesser life, and I would very much disagree with that.
Yeah. I had previously, before this interview, I've interviewed David Rowland. He's the author of a book called How I Rescued My Brain. And he
Yeah,
is a psychologist by profession, and he experienced a stroke.
yeah,
And now the book that he's
um, um,
written is being used as a tool to educate other health professionals about
wow,
how to go about speaking to people
yeah,
and treating people, amongst other things, that have experienced stroke, especially since they've never experienced it and they don't know
yeah,
what it's like. So
wow,
I said to him, it was great that I met him and that he went through all of this.
yeah,
I never wished that he would experience a stroke, but as a
yeah,
psychologist who experienced a stroke, he's got a lot of value to offer to the
yeah,
rest of his peers about how to go about treating human beings that have experienced a stroke. And I love what you did. I love the fact that you had the conversation with your doctors. I didn't have a conversation with my doctors, but I did sack my doctors. So my doctors, the first batch, I didn't enjoy the way they were talking about me at the edge of my bed with other people, and they weren't including me in the conversation. And I just said, I've had enough of you people. I'm out of here. Took my paperwork and I went to another hospital and I met with another surgeon and another doctor. And I said, this is the way that I want you guys to work with me and treat me. Are you any problems with that? And they said, no, that's how we work. No problems with that. And basically then the conversation was free flowing. And like you, I needed information. I wanted to know what had happened, where it happened, why it happened. What can I do to make sure that it doesn't happen again? Even if it's a physical thing that's gone wrong, what can I do to try and make the situation better? I don't want to be told that it's too dangerous, we can't operate, we can't do this, we can't do that. You're just taking away all my spirit. So I love the way that you set the record straight with your doctors.
Yeah. I had a therapist quit on me. I think I was my physiotherapist, the head physiotherapist, said that initially the first month when I'd entered rehabilitation, that everybody was terrified of this patient who couldn't move and couldn't talk, but yet could spell out and be really bossy. I would challenge my therapist if they were 10 minutes late. If they wanted to finish my therapy early, I would spell out absolutely not. And I was supposed to get an hour of each discipline, and I made sure that I got an hour of each. But I had 3 occupational therapists quit on me. Their timekeeping wasn't very good.
Wow, that is amazing. That says a lot about them as opposed to you. In episode 10 of the podcast, I interviewed a lady from Scottish heritage. She is fiery and she experienced a stroke, and the physical therapist that came to her house was talking about her hand that was not working correctly at the time. She was talking about her hand as being the bad hand.
Yeah.
And my friend Claire said, hang on a second, that's not how you talk about my hand. It's not the bad hand. It's just a hand that needs therapy, that needs to get better.
Yeah.
So please don't talk about my hand in that way. And that therapist never came back.
I think a lot, I guess I often say it's like the police service. I think the more life experience you have, the better you are at your job. And again, I found the older therapists had maybe more patient experience, and so were a lot more understanding, and I guess just with their experience, just a little better at their job role.
Yeah. So you got out of hospital around 7 months after the stroke, after you were locked in.
Yeah.
How soon before you got out of hospital were you able to speak? How soon after being locked in did your speech come back?
It was a very lengthy process. My speech just didn't return. I had dysphagia and dysarthria, so all my muscles in my throat had stopped working. All the muscles in my cheeks and lips, tongue, all completely stopped working. So it was a very lengthy process to strengthen my swallow. I would spend hours drinking fruit smoothies. My partner would spend hours putting a spoon into my mouth covered in Nutella to try and get my tongue to respond to it.
Yep.
And I spent hours and hours strengthening my muscles. So when I returned home, my speech was very average. I knew what I wanted to say. I didn't have asphyxia, but I couldn't. The mouth muscles were perhaps too weak to form the letters. My diction was bad. I couldn't do some sounds, but I continued to work on that. Even my colleagues now, 3 years later, would notice that since I've returned to work, my speech has improved. It's not completely back to normal, but it does still continue to improve 3 years later.
Yeah, I watched one of the interviews that was on Facebook, and you have improved a lot since then. And I think that interview was a couple of years ago on
Yeah,
one of the chat shows. So yeah, it's
yeah,
constantly improving, and that's one thing that people need to know is that recovery happens slowly, and it's important to
uh,
get some video footage of yourself if you can, so that you can look back in 6 months or in 12
yeah,
months and compare yourself so you can feel good about the progress that you've made, because often we don't notice how we're progressing, but other people do notice how we're progressing.
yeah. I find it interesting. I have a window cleaner, and he comes every 6 weeks. And every 6 weeks when he comes, even now 3 years later, he still notices physical improvements, and I enjoy it. He's like a measure. If he doesn't comment on seeing an improvement now, I'm almost disappointed.
Well, make sure that you tell him to tell you about the
Yeah.
improvements. Hey, you've gone back to work now, uh,
Yeah.
back with the police force.
Yeah. I'm back in the police service of Northern Ireland. Um, I I'm no longer in the public order team in the riot squad. With my disabilities, that job role is just not suitable now. A walking aid isn't appropriate in frontline policing. However, back in February this year, I sat the National Police Investigator exam, which is to be a detective. So I passed that exam, and I'm now doing a detective role in CID locally, and really enjoy it. Investigate frauds, burglary. I'm involved in more serious offences such as murder and attempted murder, and it's challenging but very rewarding.
Yeah, congratulations, well done. I imagine that that's also helping your mind and your body to recover, and you're finding your limits, and you're also starting to get beyond your limits as far as what you're able to achieve on a daily basis and do on a daily basis.
Absolutely. I returned to work 18 months after I had my stroke, and I had wanted to return to full time hours, but occupational health and welfare at work had told me that I had to have a phased return, starting with 3 hours a day for 3 days a week, and I was very opposed to that. And it was explained to me that everybody who had an illness and was returning to work would be phased back, because the police service of Northern Ireland wanted, along with the person, for the return to be successful. And I found that I was able to increase my hours and my days, but it was challenging, and I did suffer from fatigue.
Mm.
But now I'm back full time, and I find that I can manage any tiredness that I do have. And I feel the phase return has definitely helped a very successful return. My fatigue levels are much, much, much lower now.
Yeah, that's
And
amazing.
I personally have got stronger.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love your spirit. I love your fight. If I was in Ireland and something bad happened to me, I would love for you to be on my team, trying to find the person and bring them, to justice, to support me. I love the way you go about your work and the way you've gone about your recovery. How long
Thank you.
how long has it been? Are you back to driving?
I returned to driving 18 months after taking my stroke. I'm very proud of the fact that I returned to work walking, talking, and driving. I would say not perfectly,
Mm.
but was able to do all. I have an adapted mini Countryman. It has, I can only drive with one hand. My right side is still affected. I have a hand control for my left hand, and I drive an automatic. The accelerator is now on my left hand side, so it has taken a bit of retraining my brain to be able to do that. But I very much enjoy driving my vehicle. It does surprise people when they get in and realise that it is adapted. It was initially challenging, but now I enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. I just am so pleased that I got to find your post somewhere on Facebook and to reach out to you. I think it was Instagram actually, and
Yeah,
to reach out to you and to get a response always makes me smile. I
yeah,
love it when people respond, and interviewing people like you is just makes my recovery a lot easier and a lot better. So you're doing a massive thing. Thank you
yeah.
so much for reaching out and being on the
Well, likewise,
podcast.
people always say to me, "You're very inspiring," and I always say, "I'm so inspired by other stroke survivors that I meet, and when I hear their stories." And so I think for me in my recovery, I particularly enjoy hearing from other stroke survivors. When I was in rehabilitation, an elderly woman came in to see me, and she said to me she was 80 years of age. I looked at her and thought, why has she visited me? But she sought me out. My story had been in the media and the press. And she told me, Clodah, my name's Hazel. When I was, I think, 32 and a young mother, I had a brainstem stroke. And for almost 3 years, I couldn't talk and I couldn't walk. And I looked at this glamorous elderly woman who'd walked into my ward, both walking and talking. And she told me, you will get there. Don't change too much about your home, because uh, if you change things about the home, you will make yourself more disabled. Face all your challenges, and if you do that, you will overcome them. She told me a story about she was in a wheelchair, and her 2-year-old daughter had slipped in a paddling pool and started to drown. And she was in a wheelchair, unable to move and unable to talk. So she couldn't run to help her daughter, and she couldn't call for help. She just sat there watching as her toddler drowned. But thankfully, her husband came along, and saw the child and rescued the child. And for me, it's an unimaginable story. First of all, the actual story yourself, having to watch the child drown. But this woman was standing by my bedside at 80 years of age, glamorous and talking so articulately, and it it gave me massive hope that yes, I will get there. And she'd also told me that when her daughter was 4, that her and her daughter attended speech and language therapy together, because the child had never learned to talk. Hazel and her husband, when they were at home, Hazel couldn't talk, so her husband and her had never had a conversation. So their daughter hadn't learned to talk. So her and her daughter learned to talk together.
Wow.
Yeah,
And this is the
yeah,
thing, this is a person who doctors could learn so much from, if they
yeah,
understood
absolutely.
and followed the story of somebody who was 80 who had a stroke, probably 30 at 30.
Yeah.
So 50 years ago, it was much harder to
So,
recover from
oh yeah,
stroke. And
she
she's,
told me she was discharged from hospital after 5 weeks, and at that time, she couldn't move a single muscle like me from the top of her face to the toes in her feet, and couldn't talk. And she was left in the care of her husband, and he also had the 2-year-old and a 4-year-old son. So, and now in Northern Ireland, we would have care packages. If someone was to be sent home from hospital in that condition, they would have someone come in and assist the family 4 times a day. But back 50 years ago, there was no such thing.
wow.
So her husband relied on her family, his family, and himself to do all the personal care and to help her recover.
Yeah, wow. So we have a completely different situation these days. No doubt that locked-in
Yeah,
syndrome, stroke, any serious illness is difficult for people to deal with, but we're dealing
absolutely.
with it in our time, and the resources are more plentiful. Even though there's never enough, we still have more resources.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this lady is the perfect example of how you can, with enough time, and enough effort and enough focus and attention to your well-being and your own responsibility to recover, you can really make a massive impact on life and live a full life and get to 80 and beyond. And that's
Absolutely.
what we want to do. We want to offer hope to people who are listening and who might be going through something just as serious now. So again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Well, I feel like I need to interview you now and hear your story.
By all means,
I'm interested.
anytime I'm available. Make yourself, whenever you've got time, just reach out. I'll be happy to help you. I want to keep in contact, and I want to keep following inspirational people, and you're one of those people. So anytime.
Just quickly, what age did you have your stroke and what happened?
Yeah, so I was 37.
Yeah.
And what had happened was I noticed some numbness in my left toe, in my big toe on my left foot.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I noticed that on a Friday. And I have a property maintenance business that I'd been running, and that meant that the next 2 days I had work to do, Friday and Saturday. We needed to, fix ceilings and paint walls and all that type of stuff. And we had deadlines, so there was no way that I was going to attend to a numb sensation in my big toe. It meant nothing. But then the numbness spread from the toe to the entire left side of the body over the next 7 days.
Yeah.
And I ignored the symptoms for pretty much 7 days. My wife noticed me walking funny after the 3rd day or 4th day. She said to me, "You're walking funny." And I said to her, "You're crazy. Leave me alone. I've got work to do. I'm busy."
Yeah.
And I went to the chiropractor because I thought I'd done something to my back. And my chiropractor said, "Whatever has happened to your body is not happening in your back. It's happening elsewhere. You need to go to the hospital immediately." And when I got to the hospital 7 days after the first symptom, they noticed that there was a bleed on the brain on the right-hand side. And it was caused by a defective blood vessel that I had been born with and just took 37 years to bleed, to leak. And it was a very small leak, and it bled slowly. But as the amount of blood started to increase in the brain, it started to impact more and more of my left side.
Yeah.
And then 6 weeks later, I had another massive bleed. And at that point in time, I didn't recognize my wife. I didn't know my name. I didn't know what was going on. And that took me around about 6 months to start to recover and get my memory back and speak properly, get back to work and do all those types of things. And then almost 3 years after the first incident, so in February 2012 was the first incident, the third incident was in November 2014. It happened again. And then I had surgery in November 2014 to remove the faulty blood vessel. And when I woke up from surgery, I couldn't feel my left side, and I had to learn how to walk again and use my arm again. And I got back to sort of being at home just before Christmas of 2014. And then it's been an ongoing, continual, gradual, like you, recovery to some kind of normal work life, some kind of normal home life, and dealing with fatigue and a whole bunch of other issues. And then something that really impacted my health recently in the last 2 years was I had thyroid surgery, and the general anesthetic that I took actually really affected the damage that I had received on the brain from the surgery, and it made it worse. And I noticed that when I woke up, my numbness on my left side and my right side was more emphasized, and I couldn't feel as much as I could previously. And now I was dealing with, similar but worse sensations on my left side. So that was my story, briefly.
Wow, you've been through the wars, Bill.
Yeah, we all have. Stroke patients have, and I get comfort in knowing that other people are doing well in their recovery, and they're having ups and downs. But it just sounds like now a lot of the ups and downs are becoming part of average, basic life. It's it's just another up and down.
Yeah.
But we just notice it a little bit more and we have to take care of our response after that, because when I have a down, it could last 2 days, and I'm not very nice to be around. I'm not useful. I'm not productive, and that frustrates me. So if I take care of myself during those downtimes, I decrease the downtime and increase the uptime. So I'm learning about how to help myself as much as everyone else has to learn about, how to get through their own stroke.
I find that diet really affects me and my fatigue and mood. That if my partner, he has children from his previous marriage, and if they come down and we order Domino's pizza and pick out pizza and lots of carbs, I fatigue and it really affects me. But if I eat a very clean diet, eat lots of vegetables and protein, that largely I'm perfectly okay.
Yeah, I was the same. I had dialed down my diet, and the thyroid surgery made my metabolism slow a little bit and made me hypothyroid, which means that carbs affect me even worse now.
Yeah.
So I absolutely noticed that stopping the carbs really brought my brain back to life, and clean, healthy veggies and protein and nice oils, clean, healthy oils brought me back to life. And now the thyroid surgery just made any kind of carb very difficult for my body to process, and immediately my brain starts to go to sort of slow down and shut down, and it starts to process things a lot slower, and I start to respond differently. So part of the work that I'm doing is I wanted to bring these types of stories to people, but at the same time, through the recoveryafterstroke.com website, is create a community where we can bring people together, and I can train them, and they can come in a community and talk about what's working for them and what's not working, and we can all support each other in a recovery that seems to be going to be long, for the rest of our lives, a long-term recovery, and care of our bodies and care of ourselves, so that we can have a very productive life despite what it is that we experience. So that's what I'm motivated to do now. And I figure if I'm teaching other people how to take care of their brain and recover after stroke, then I have to walk the walk and talk the talk. Otherwise, I can't do it.
Yeah.
It keeps
I know what you mean.
Keeps me honest.
Wow. It's been so nice to talk to you.
And to you. I hope to talk to you again. I will
follow
you, and I will keep in touch with your social media. And
thank you.
I just really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's been really nice talking to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Recovery After Stroke podcast. If you like this or any other Recovery After Stroke podcast episodes, please hit the like button. If you are watching on social media, give us a thumbs up if you are watching on the YouTube channel, and give the Recovery After Stroke podcast a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. Doing that will make the podcast more visible to other stroke survivors that are doing it tough right now, and it could help them feel inspired and feel better about the road ahead. Thanks again for listening.
Discover how to heal your brain after stroke. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com. Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation consultation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.